unrelated to anything, but just the subject of big butts naturally made me think of horses. 'Cause sometimes their butts are just really big.
I wish people could see my face.
I do too. But I wanted to tell you, yesterday where my mom lives, I got to meet a 36-year-old horse. That is freaking old.
How long do horses live for?
I mean, like, average lifespan is probably like mid-late 20s.
Wow, so they're like cats.
Yeah, they do.
But this one passed their age a long time ago.
Right. And I mean, and I've seen horses that are like 40. I mean, it's
what?
Kind of like if you take care of them and if they have the right genetics for it, they'll live for a very long time. But average is like mid-late 20s. So anyway, I met a 36-year-old horse who is so sweet. He was adorable. He just had a couple of teeth pulled. And so he's just walking around with his tongue sticking out a little bit because he had just woken up from a nap too. He's just like, He was so sweet. And apparently his owner puts him in the little turnout pasture right next to where my mom keeps her mule, Sally Ann. Mm-hmm. So when Mama takes Sally out in the morning, she goes and loves on Raz, which I'm just like, oh my gosh, you're so cute.
I need to go. No. This is it. I need to go next year because I need to meet 37-year-old Raz.
Right? Exactly. You gotta meet him.
I know your ranch is probably very fun, but I have to mentally prepare myself the moment that I buy those tickets to go fly over there. Uh-huh. And like,
You're gonna love it.
Mentally prepare. I might love it. I might never leave. Exactly. You're gonna have to send me back because Alex needs to marry someone. It ain't gonna be anyone but me.
Right. Exactly. So. And I mean, and think of it this way: like, yes, there's animals and wilderness, but also there's a hot spring.
That's a great way to entice me.
Here we go.
All right. Well, we were supposed to start. This episode.
We can just tack that onto the bonus content. Just be like, bonus content.
Now we have a new thing. We have bonus content, and then we have bonus content that we forgot to put in the bonus content.
Because we can't shut up.
Because we can't shut up, and then we put it into our actual... Well, you get the idea. Anyways, welcome to Story Sirens, the podcast where we deep dive into myths and legends, sometimes to the point of torture. I'm Yenny.
And I'm Sarah. And the reason we are sighing is because this Greek myth we decided to cover ended up filling our plates a bit too much.
Enough to feed 720 men?
Quite possibly. Today's tale will be quite epic. Get it?
Yeah, Sarah. All right, come on. Go with it.
All right. If you're wondering what we could possibly be speaking of today, I'm sure you're not actually wondering. Let me just start by asking you this. Are you ready to go full speed ahead?
Would you be willing to travel to the lair of Scylla to evade Poseidon? If Epic the Musical by Jorge Rivera-Herran comes to mind, then just like us, you've had that playlist on repeat.
Today, we begin covering the Odyssey. Okay. I didn't know you were counting.
I was trying to count for you.
Okay.
Let's do it together. 1, 2, 3.
The Odyssey.
What a great way to remember my junior year, pulling my hairs out as the class studied this amazing tale.
Oh, I'm sure you had fun.
No.
Okay, well, this time, I'm sure you had fun.
Yeah, I did.
All right, well, sing on, oh muse.
Got it. So, just as we did when we studied the Monkey King,
episodes 5 and 6,
we'll be breaking our deep dive of the Odyssey in 2 parts. But before we go into the Homeric poems, perhaps we should educate our listeners on who Homer was, or perhaps were.
Ooh. This 24-book epic, literally, that's what the style is called, is one of the most famous works of Grecian literature. Even if you're not familiar with the story of the Odyssey, you have heard of the Odyssey. It is a sequel to Homer's The Iliad, which focuses on the Trojan War. Now, the exact authorship of these Homeric poems is an ongoing debate, mainly because the tale of the Odyssey, like so many others, comes from oral traditions that were written later on. These oral traditions date back hundreds of years and more than likely were written in the form of a song. And so, just like the Iliad, many historians question how this song turned to text could come from a single person.
And this is what has been coined the Homeric question, or rather, questions. Who was Homer? Was it a group of people or just a single person?
From Homer to Shakespeare, brilliant writers are always questioned and surrounded by mystery and controversy.
I agree. These questions have continued on today. But one particular idea of the writer has been more agreed upon, being that Homer was a blind man who listened to these oral traditions and memorized them all. Some scholars even believe that Homer speaks of himself via one of the two singers who leers in the Odyssey, Demokritos, who is depicted as a blind poet.
The Greeks do have a thing for blindness.
I did want to mention that in the 19th century, English novelist and critic Samuel Butler suggested that the Odyssey may in fact have been written by a woman.
Ooh.
I will say, few scholars have agreed with this suggestion, mainly because there is very little, if any, evidence of women being composers of epics during that era. I would also like to point out that some people actually think that Butler stated that because of the fact that women are depicted as being strong in this story. And, of course, if women are written strong, it must be because, like a woman did it.
Yeah, because, whoever heard of, why would a man write a strong female character? Calm down, Butler. Calm down.
Calm down, Butler.
It is doable. It is doable. Sometimes. All right. Now, both the tales of the Odyssey and the Iliad roughly take place sometime between 1250 and 1600 BC. But as to the exact time of the composition of the two stories, that also seems to be a great debacle. But most historians agree they were most likely written around 750 BC. This date is agreed upon because Greece began using a modified version of the Phoenician alphabet around the middle of the 8th century BC.
A 3,000-year-old epic poem still being discussed today. Remember when we covered Plato in our Atlantis episode? Yeah, Plato was studying this exact poem all those years ago too. So when Sarah and I say this puppy is ancient, we mean ancient. Yet, although this text has been around for centuries, many people still assume that the Odyssey is all about Odysseus, the character whose point of view covers most of the tale. In reality, it is not. The Odyssey revolves around Odysseus's nuclear family, himself, his wife Penelope, and his son Telemachus. While Odysseus is having 10 years' worth of trials and tribulations as he tries to go back to Ithaca,
after 10 years of the Trojan War,
his wife Penelope is back at home fighting off suitors, attempting to claim her as their wife and take over their kingdom. His son, Telemachus, is seeking information about his father's whereabouts and aiding his mother in fighting off suitors while also going on his own journey to find information about Odysseus. Odysseus is depicted as many things throughout the story, from a pirate to a king, a husband to a lover, a father to a leader, but most of all, he is a deceiver. Ooh, I rhymed.
Ooh, you did.
And you will learn more about his deceptive ways once we get into the story. His main focus throughout this whole story is to get home to his wife and his glory, and he will have nothing stopping him from achieving this. He also had a thing for honor, wanting to become something of a legend to all of Greece, aka legendary. That song is so good. Which I think we can agree that he achieved.
I mean, we're talking about him.
Yeah. His stubbornness and courage to keep pushing forward no matter what is notable. But with this comes his weaknesses. He breaks down in tears multiple times in the story, has fits of rage, and is often withdrawn from those around him. And also is unfaithful to his...
Yenny. No. Don't spoil it.
Sorry. Sarah, come on. This story is 3,000 years old. What is there to spoil?
Just let me read my part, dang it, okay?
Ugh.
Now, on the flip side, we have Penelope, who is clever, quick-witted, and fiercely loyal to Odysseus. Her love for him is strong. 20-plus years of waiting, strong. She is known for her great weaving skills and storytelling abilities, for she lies and uses the excuse of weaving a large piece of cloth as a task that must be completed before she could ever choose a husband from amongst the suitors. While the reader does not get to see inside Penelope's mind, we do see the great pain she is in as she waits, what seems like endlessly, for her husband's return. We also see that she and Odysseus are equally matched in terms of wit and cleverness, making them quite the power couple. Telemachus, Odysseus and Penelope's only son, was a newborn when Odysseus left for the war and is in his 20s when we begin the story of the Odyssey, attempting to find his father whilst also taking charge of the household and keeping his mother safe. His role in the story is so important that the first 4 books in the Odyssey are named the Telemachy. Good-natured and pure, Telemachus is seen as the most vulnerable member of the family, unable to speak up in times of need, and also fighting to stay alive as suitors in Ithaca plan his murder. His weakness and lack of confidence in the beginning later evolves, thanks to father figures coming into his life, but also thanks to a certain goddess keeping a watchful eye on him. Telemachus is venturing on a journey, or, dare we say, Odyssey of his own, as he grows from a nervous young man to a courageous, self-assured prince of Ithaca. Now, as we mentioned just a second ago, the Odyssey, named after Odysseus, does not begin with Oladi. It begins with a meeting of the gods of Olympus, and then focuses on Telemachus, whose very life is in danger, as we mentioned, as he searches for news of his father. The book starts in the middle of the story. Think of those movies, TV shows, and books that throw you right in the heart of the action, and then the flashcard comes up saying 3 weeks earlier. Homer was the king of throwing the reader right into the deep end of the story. No warning, no warm-up, sink or swim, reader.
Aw, Sarah, was that pun on purpose?
No, it was not. I'm just naturally corny.
Nah.
To briefly sum up, the 24 books of the Odyssey can be split into 5 parts. The Council of the Gods and the Journeys of Telemachus, the Second Council of the Gods and Odysseus' final travel dangers, Odysseus recounting his 10 years of travels, Odysseus arriving home to Ithaca and reuniting with Telemachus, and Odysseus conquering the suitors and reclaiming his throne. We shall cover the story chronologically, but first, context.
A common subject that is explored in the Odyssey is hospitality, or xenia in Greek. How the nuclear family and supporting characters deal with strangers and those familiar to them is in fact the central subject of this epic tale. One's hospitality, or xenia, was very important throughout this era. We must remember this was a time before money and background checks. Their currency was treasure, material items, food, and hospitality. And therefore, many people would meet and greet and befriend strangers in order to obtain food or aid whilst on a journey. The Odyssey shows us 2 sides of the same coin, one being what may happen when hospitality is used for good, and the other when it is used for bad. As a master of deceit, Odysseus uses his xenia as a means to get the upper hand in all situations, while for Penelope and Telemachus, their xenia helps them to stay afloat throughout the 20 years of Odysseus' absence. Now, humans are not the only ones who show off their hospitality in both good and bad ways. There are certain gods and goddesses that Homer also uses to explore the many kinds of xenia. I hate this word, but I am going to continue saying it because it's cool. Xenia. Okay, sorry. In this tale, you'll meet goddess Calypso, actually at the really beginning of the story, who gives her guests everything they want, except the ability to leave. Another example, Aeolus, god of the winds, aids Odysseus with moving their ship faster. But of course, it comes with a catch, and we'll get into that later. But there are gods who do aid him without much of a catch, one of whom is Hermes, god of merchants, travelers, and tricksters, which pretty much checks every other box under Odysseus. Hermes appears in pivotal moments throughout the journey. Some of the most important moments including aiding Odysseus in overpowering Circe, and later being the one to persuade Calypso to let Odysseus go. But the ever-appearing and most important god in this epic tale is the goddess of wisdom and war, Athena. Oh, I love that part. Can you tell that we listened to the soundtrack way too much?
So much.
Athena convinces her father Zeus to help Odysseus at the very beginning of the tale, stating Odysseus is intelligent and sensible compared to most humans. The goddess and human have a strong bond, and their comfort and joy in each other's presence is noticeable throughout the story. I want to make something clear. There is no lovey-dovey.
Yeah,
they are just friends.
They're friends.
They're very, very good
platonic.
friends. Yeah, very platonic, and there is such a thing. So, sorry, I have a lot to say about platonic relationships and how they're real. Athena cares not just for Odysseus, but for his family, keeping a close eye on his wife and son. As to her motives in aiding Odysseus, it isn't quite clear. She may be seeking the greatest warrior of all time. After all, she is frequently in competition against her brother and fellow god of war Ares. Or maybe she just enjoys Odysseus's intelligence and strategic mind. I mean, hey, do we have to have a reason to enjoy someone's company?
Nope. Sometimes we're just drawn to people, and the idea that the gods are just drawn to people is a fun one for this story.
I believe so too. I like that. Now, is there a villain in this story? Well, there's quite a few, but the most prominent is Poseidon, god of the sea, storms, and earthquakes. Odysseus makes the wrong move.
He is human, so of course.
And angers Poseidon greatly. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Sarah, I think we've covered enough history and a totally simple explanation of key characters in the epic tale that we can get on to the actual story, don't you think?
Of course, because our listeners are totally still here with us. Wait, are we the new Calypsos in the story, Yenny?
Psh, hot goddesses who live on a magical island and hold an audience captive? I mean, why not?
All right, listeners, let's actually get into the story. Going in chronological order. The story begins as the Trojan War ends, which again, it lasted for 10 years. Big deal. Many great heroes and villains were involved in this war, including Agamemnon, Menelaus, Helen of Troy, the princes of Troy, Hector and Paris, Patroclus, and one of our favorite heroes, Achilles. Most of these characters are dead by the end of the war. But Odysseus, who was fighting against the Trojans and who is credited with the idea of the Trojan horse, is still alive. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, and his crew of roughly 720 men, sailing in 12 ships, head home. The journey also lasts 10 years. And spoilers, only Odysseus survives.
Yeah, I mean, again, not really a spoiler. I'm sure all of us have heard about Odysseus at least once in our lives.
So, listeners, at this moment, we would like to inform you that legendary Troy would be located in the northwest coast of modern-day Turkey. Odysseus' kingdom of Ithaca was in the Ionian Islands of Greece. They are 565 nautical miles apart from each other. That distance should only have taken Odysseus a few weeks to cover. But the gods and fates had other plans. The men of Ithaca set sail from Troy and landed near the city of Ismaris, which is in Cecones. Cecones were allies of the Trojans.
And dear listener, we must inform you that Homer's Odysseus is not as gentle as Jorge's Odysseus.
As Troy had lost the war, Odysseus and his men believed that they had the right to take whatever they wanted from Trojan allies. So they took as much food, wine, and pleasure from Cecones as they wanted. They killed the men, bedded the women, and enjoyed the quote-unquote spoils of war.
A reminder to our listeners, this was a time where salaries didn't really exist. Spoils of war were used as a means to reward soldiers for their service. It was also an incentive that would make it easier for citizens to freely join the war. Since survival and victory would offer food, shelter, livestock, wives, slaves, and land, I mean, most of the men were like, hey, I ain't got nothing over here, why not?
Mm-hmm. So, during all of the violence, Odysseus did order that a priest of Apollo be spared. The priest thanked him by gifting him fine wines.
Real quick, that's a weird thing to... Oh, yeah, thank you for killing everybody.
But not me.
Here's some wine.
Yeah. So, as the men of Ithaca enjoyed their spoils of war, reinforcements came for the Cicones, killing 72 of Odysseus' men and forcing the Greeks to flee.
Listeners, here comes our countdown of Odysseus' men. Count of Odysseus' men, 648.
Nice. So, on their 12 ships sailed, and after 2 weeks of poor winds, Odysseus was informed that their provisions were running low. They looked for land where they could hunt wildlife and forage. An island was discovered, and Odysseus and a few men ventured to shore, while instructing the rest of the men to stay behind with the ships and draw clean water. The scouting party found the native people of the island, who strangely looked like they came from all over the world. They were offered a strange fruit by the locals, called the lotus fruit. But Odysseus had been warned against this food by the gods. The lotus fruit was known to cause forgetfulness and laziness. People who ate the fruit forgot about their homelands, their goals, their dreams, and wanted to do nothing more than sit in the shade of the lotus tree and eat.
If you want to hear more about the lotus fruit as well as other fruits, you can actually check out our episode 13 called Magic Fruits, where we deep dive into what this fruit really does and what not to eat.
Odysseus stops his men from eating the fruit and hurries them back to the ships. This was not a safe island to explore, and they needed to continue their journey homeward, regardless of whether or not they had enough food on the ship. So, they sailed for several more weeks and found another island. Now, at this point, the men are starving, and from the distance, they could see that this island was lush, full of trees and birds. Odysseus ordered 11 of his ships to beach on one coast, while he took the 12th remaining ship to the island's opposite coast to explore it further. Odysseus and crew began exploring the island, and they found sheep and goats everywhere. They were thrilled. There were enough sheep to feed their men for the rest of the voyage home. There was also a large cave with goats and sheep penned inside the cave, and Odysseus ordered his men to bring the wine into the cave, build a fire, and slaughter some of the fatter sheep so they could feast. The men also found baskets of bread and cheese in the cave, and they ate those as well. Now, why Odysseus would just help himself to what were obviously someone else's sheep, cheese, and bread is a bit beyond me. Yenny, is this part of the hospitality rule?
It definitely is, and it makes sense because back in the day, in that specific culture, it was very normal. If you're hungry, you just go up to someone and be like, hey, can you feed me? I'll do some work for you. But it was already implied, so it does make sense. Thinking about it, it does make sense because they would give you one for the other, right? It was like a bargain deal.
I'm just making sure because, maybe Odysseus was probably going to pay this shepherd with wine. Maybe.
Well, he is a master deceiver, and I think we should just continue the story.
You know what? You're right. While the men are feasting and drinking, the shepherd did indeed come back to his cave. He just wasn't a human shepherd.
Here we go.
A giant cyclops by the name of Polyphemus entered the cave, driving the rest of his flock before him into the safety of his home. And he found a good portion of his flock slaughtered and eaten by strangers. Polyphemus was naturally enraged and blocked the exit of the cave with a massive stone so no one could escape. He demanded, "Why are you in my cave? Why are you killing my animals?" Odysseus replied, "Dear friend, we are Greeks returning from war. Remember your duty to the gods and be kind to us." Polyphemus did not remember his duty to the gods. He grabbed 2 of Odysseus' men, smashed their heads against the cavern wall, and ate them.
Count of Odysseus' men, 646.
The men, naturally, were terrified and all cowered at the back of the cave, and Odysseus spent the entire night with his head in his hands, trying to figure out how he was going to get his men out of this monster's lair. Even when his men approached him, Odysseus wouldn't say anything. This kind of goes back to what Yenny was saying of how he would withdraw himself.
I mean, I will say, it is a lot on his shoulders to take care of 720, then going down little by little. Each death is just like a notch to him.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's too much.
It's hurting
so it's a lot for one person.
Yeah. He is their king. He
Yeah.
has to see them die, and this is not an easy thing for him. So he knew Polyphemus was going to kill them. He was their only hope of salvation. The boulder that blocked their path was too massive for his men to even attempt to move. So he knows he can't kill the Cyclops. He needs the Cyclops to help get them out. So morning comes. The Cyclops snatches up 2 more sailors and eats them for breakfast, sends his flock out of the cave, and seals it up behind him. The men turn to their captain, terrified and hopeless, but Odysseus doesn't say anything. He just sat by the fire sharpening a long stick. When the Cyclops returned for the evening, he ate 2 more sailors.
Count of Odysseus's men, 642.
So, as he was getting ready to fall asleep, Odysseus approached the Cyclops and offered him the wine that had been brought to shore. Polyphemus thanked Odysseus for the gift and asked him his name. I too like to know the names of my food.
What? No.
I'm being weird, okay? I'm being sarcastic because, this Cyclops is obviously planning to eat him, but he's like, oh, well, hey, what's your name? I'd like to know before I chow down on you.
No. Grace.
So Odysseus tells him that his name was Odysseus, which means nobody. The Cyclops drank all of the wine and passed out. That's when the men attacked. They drove the large stick Odysseus had been sharpening into the eye of the Cyclops and twisted until the monster's eye was ruined. The monster, of course, shot up and roared, reaching for the men. But Odysseus had instructed his men to hide underneath the sheep and goats. Polyphemus cried out in agony and rage, and his cry summoned other Cyclopses to his aid. They rolled away the stone that covered Polyphemus's cave and asked him, what's going on? Who hurt him? And his reply, nobody hurt me. The monsters looked into the cave and saw nothing but sheep and goats. So the other Cyclopses told him to be silent and to tend to his animals. So Polyphemus sent his herd outside, running his hands over their backs to see if Odysseus's men were riding the sheep. He never checked their underbellies. Once outside, the men raced back to the ship, got on board, and set sail. But Odysseus, while clever, was full of pride and called out to Polyphemus,
Monster! You dare to eat men who sought shelter in your home, and you have been punished accordingly. If anyone asked who outwitted you, tell them it was the great Odysseus, king of Ithaca. You dumbass.
The Cyclops wailed in anger and threw a boulder at Odysseus' ship, but missed. The ship sailed around the coast, met with the rest of the fleet, and they fled the island. Now, what Odysseus didn't know about Polyphemus was that the Cyclops was the son of none other than Poseidon, god of the sea and tides.
Which is why I called Odysseus a dumbass right after I read that.
Polyphemus prayed to his father, begging that Poseidon avenge him and destroy Odysseus of Ithaca. The god of the sea heard Polyphemus's anguish and promised to have his revenge.
And so begins one of Odysseus's biggest regrets, being merciful and letting the Cyclops live. But also, again, it does not help if you yell out your name and location, dude. Like, maybe if he just said Odysseus, Poseidon would have had, maybe a harder time finding him, right?
There's
because
10 of them?
Odysseus, there's 10. Yeah, you know what? He got to go one at a time, right?
Got to go through the
phone
phone book.
You said King of Ithaca. Yeah, the Greek phone book. But no.
Idiot. So the men of Ithaca sailed on and were met by storms and terrible winds. I wonder why.
No.
They made very poor progress trying to get home. But one day they saw something extraordinary, an island floating in the sky. Now, in some of the variations, the island floats in the sky. In other variations, they see a great island in the sea surrounded by a bronze wall. But I like the idea of it floating in the sky. That's kind of fun.
I do too.
So the fleet dropped their anchor and climbed up the vines that were dangling off of the island. On top, the island was surrounded by a massive bronze wall. The gate of the wall was opened, and the men were welcomed inside. They discovered that the island belonged to the god of winds, Aeolus. Now, Aeolus was a very generous god, and he hosted Odysseus and crew on his island for an entire month. A month!
See, this is why I wonder if Audie really wanted to get back to his wife.
I know.
Because I'm like, come on now.
I'd be going, excuse me, time's a wasting.
Yeah, time is a ticking. But this also comes with Xenia, because perhaps they couldn't leave because of the hospitality they were given. I mean,
you have to honor your gracious host.
Yeah.
So
we'll give him the benefit.
We'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. So after a month, the fleet was ready to resume their journey home. Odysseus and crew thanked Aeolus profusely for his hospitality, and Aeolus in turn presented Odysseus with a large bag that was tied shut with a silver cord. The wind god told Odysseus that he had gathered up all of the storm winds and harsh gales into the bag, and as long as it remained closed, the fleet would have nothing but gentle breezes to help them on their journey home. If a change of direction was needed, Odysseus merely needed to open up the bag a little and release one wind at a time. Again, Odysseus thanked the wind god and returned to his ship. There was smooth sailing for several days, but Odysseus caught word that some members of the crew believed the bag Aeolus had given him was filled with fine wines or other treasures. So Odysseus guarded the bag night and day, refusing to sleep. Unfortunately, exhaustion did catch up to the captain, and he fell asleep, leaving the bag unattended. The crew pounced on it, opening it wide, and all of the storm winds rushed out, pushing the ship all the way back to Aeolus's island.
Oh, no.
I know. Odysseus was furious with his crew, and he meekly returned to the bronze gate he had once entered through. He apologized to the god of winds for his crew's insubordination and asked if Aeolus would be willing to help him again. But this time, the gate was slammed shut in Odysseus's face. Aeolus told the captain,
"I cannot help someone who is so obviously despised by the gods. Begone."
So Odysseus returned to his ship, told the men to break out the oars, and they began the arduous task of rowing all the way home. Now, real quick, Yenny, what was our head count again?
According to my notes right here, 642.
All right, well, let's keep that in mind.
That doesn't sound very good.
Yeah, nope, nothing does. So, for 6 days, the men rowed towards home. They barely made any progress, and without wind, they rowed themselves to near exhaustion. On the 7th day, they found the harbor city of Telepylus of Lastrygons, set between two great cliffs. Odysseus was suspicious of the city. After all, the harbor is between two cliffs. That means if they go in, there's only one way to get out, and they can't really see what's going on around them.
Right.
Since Odysseus was suspicious for the reasons I described, he anchored his ship outside of the harbor, outside of the city limits. But one of his captains wanted to enter the harbor to see if there was food and trade goods. The remainder of the fleet, 11 ships, sailed on into the harbor. 3 men were sent ashore to meet the local people and make their greetings. After searching the city for any signs of life, they eventually found a young girl drawing water from the well. The scouts greeted her, telling her they meant her no harm and asking where everybody else was of the city. They told her of their troubles and how they were just trying to get home and they needed some provisions. She smiled warmly at them and informed them that she was, in fact, the princess of this city, and she would take them to her father, the king, who could help them. They followed her to the palace, and once inside, found out that the king and queen, and in fact, every citizen of Lastrygon, were giants.
Uh-oh.
One of the scouts was snatched up and bitten in half, and the other 2 fled from the palace, racing back to the ships and yelling for their comrades to brace themselves for danger. The scouts thought they had made it safely back to their ships when they saw no one pursuing them. But when they looked up on the cliffs, they saw that the giants of Lastrygon were there on top of them, lifting great rocks and boulders to throw onto the ships. Odysseus watched in horror as boulder after boulder crashed into his fleet, and his 11 ships sank, taking the men with them. Any men who managed to swim to shore were caught by the giants and immediately eaten. Knowing there was no saving the rest of his crew, Odysseus ordered the men of his ship to row for their lives if they ever wanted to see home again. So, now with 11 ships gone, that brings our total number of surviving Ithacans to...
45. Sarah, I am not okay.
I am not either, but don't worry, Yenny. Things will just keep getting worse before Odysseus makes it home.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
But that's a story for next week.
What? A cliffhanger? Sarah.
Hey, at least there aren't any giants throwing boulders off of this cliff.
Oh my God, Sarah, that is too soon.
Okay, fine. This isn't quite a cliffhanger because there's just a little bit more symbolism I want to discuss. For one, do you notice how frequently Odysseus and his men are getting in trouble because of food? Lotus fruit, Cyclops, stopping on the wrong islands looking for provisions. Yes, they are testing the hospitality of their neighbors, but this constant need and search for food is symbolic of their constant state of temptation. The humans in this story are succumbing to what comes easiest, what requires the least amount of restraint, while the monsters are driven by their appetites rather than by reason or logic. We'll run into this more in next week's episode.
And don't worry, guys, we'll remind you of this symbolism when we get to those points as well, just like we did today, where we stopped and covered, hey, this might be hospitality, and now we're going to stop and be like, hey, this might be that they wanted food and they have temptation issues, especially with women.
Right.
Next week is all about us females, I'll tell you that much.
And, of course, we would be remiss if we forgot about the sea.
What now?
The sea. It's another character here in the Odyssey, basically. It's symbolic of the journey of life, how it can help us by providing safe travels, food to sustain us, currents for our ships, or, much like Odysseus, it can punish us when we are consumed by our own arrogance and pride. Odysseus grew up sailing the sea. He's familiar with it. He knows what to do. But when he needs the sea to cooperate with him the most in order to return to his beloved home, the very essence of the sea itself, Poseidon, is against him. Arrogance, personal development, and spiritual growth are all themes we will also see more of in next week's episode. And of course, we'll also see monsters, a sorceress, and a massacre. Oh, what fun.
Super fun. And with that, let's go into our siren call. If you haven't spent all Christmas and most of the New Year listening to this amazing musical that we've been talking about throughout the episode, check out Epic the Musical by Jorge Rivera-Herran. We are obsessed.
Obsessed enough to do a whole 2-part series of the Odyssey. And of course, we cannot forget to include in your siren call to take a peek or perhaps also join in on the research by reading The Odyssey by Homer, translated by Emily Wilson.
Which is one of the books that we've been using to research this whole episode. And we've also gone ahead and left you the map of Odysseus' journey in the show notes. If you want to get a glimpse of where our hero went, that'll be a great source.
Yenny, I think that's enough for today. How about you?
I don't even know how to formulate sentences anymore, Sarah.
Oh, silly. There's no need to formulate sentences. Just Homeric poems.
Oh, God.
We will see you next week, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Story Sirens. You can follow us on Instagram at Story Sirens Podcast. Want to support us? Send us a cup of Ko-fi by searching ko-fi.com/storysirens. We've got lots of treats for those who become siren seekers. All research materials can be found in the episode summary. Music by Donald Guzzi and artwork by Alexis Torres. Story Sirens is a Feather and Fin production. See you soon.